Welcome to the IPPNW Global Classroom. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are calling in from. My name is Molly McGinty. I'm the Program Director at IPPNW's Central Office here in Boston, Massachusetts, and I'm going to facilitate today's session. Some quick housekeeping notes. Please remain muted throughout the session today. Write any questions in the chat or wait until the end of the session. Feel free to keep your camera on or off. I think it's great to see everybody's faces, so if you can, please have your camera on. And please come into this space with an open mind, with respect for one another. We're all coming in this space to learn together, and we all have different foundational knowledge levels. So please keep that open mind and get ready to learn some new things with all of us today. This is the first official module of our global classroom, dubbed Nuclear Weapons, where we're going to learn the foundations of why we do what we do at IPPNW and in the disarmament community. If you missed the launch about a week and a half ago of the global classroom, this is a 10-month-long virtual education program designed to prep each of you to go into your communities or onto the international stage to push back against the deadly norms of nuclear weapons. I'm going to start today's session with just a few brief remarks to bring in the context of this moment. We're gathered here on the heels of the illegal and unjustified US and Israeli bombing of Iran, which has already seen mass human deaths and harm with no end in sight. Here at IPPNW, we've condemned the attack and called on the US and Israeli authorities to cease immediately all further use of force and to return to the negotiating table. A few quick things to fact check. We'll hear a bit more about this today, but again, I want to make sure that we're all kind of speaking the same language as we go into today's session. Iran does not have a nuclear weapons program. Israel is the only nuclear weapon state in the Middle East, and alongside Russia, the United States has one of the two largest nuclear arsenals. We're closer to the brink of nuclear war than ever before. This is something that's said quite frequently in this space, but I don't think can be understated. And this unprovoked attack over the weekend just further escalates us closer to a level of unstable global order than we've previously seen before. For decades, the US and Israel have rejected multiple opportunities to seek a peaceful resolution to the legitimate concerns that Iran may be developing nuclear weapons. This refusal of multiple attempts by the UN and states parties to the NPT, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, to negotiate a Middle East nuclear weapons-free zone. During his first term, US President Trump abandoned the Iran nuclear deal that successfully contained Iran's nuclear program. And the truth is that there's no military solution to the problem of nuclear weapons proliferation anywhere in the world, and that the weapons here are the problem. The only solution to this issue and to all other threats of nuclear weapons are to eliminate them altogether through the UN Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. We'll learn about all of this and more throughout this 10-month program, but I just want to start today's session with that framing and to thank you all for being here today to again push against this deadly norm and to not accept this as reality. We're also meeting just before this Thursday's International Day for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation Awareness, so thank you for being a part of kind of commemorating this moment in this urgent moment of crisis. Okay, all of that being said, we're going to dive into the program of the hour. We're going to start with introductory remarks by Kalender Mulkubatov, who is the Deputy Permanent Representative of the Kyrgyz Republic to the United Nations. Then we're going to have a presentation by Mackenzie Knight-Boyle, the Senior Research Associate for the Nuclear Information Project at the Federation of American Scientists. Representative Mulkubatov, thank you so much for joining us here from the UN headquarters in New York City. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Molly, for giving me the floor. Dear colleagues, dear friends. First of all, I would like to express my appreciation for the invitation. It's truly a pleasure and an honor to join you at the opening of the Global Classroom and to speak to such an inspiring and diverse audience, students, young professionals, and future leaders who are already helping shape a safer world. Today, discussion about global security are once again at the center of the international attention. The risks related to nuclear weapons have not disappeared. In many ways, they have become more complex and less predictable. This is why education and public awareness on disarmament are more important than ever. As a representative of Kyrgyzstan, I would like to stress that promoting a world free of nuclear weapons is not only a foreign policy priority for us, it's a part of our historical experience and moral commitment. One of the most important contributions of our region to global security is the creation of the nuclear weapon-free zone in Central Asia. This initiative shows that countries with different histories and perspectives can come together around a shared vision of security without nuclear weapons. It's a practical example of how regional cooperation can strengthen global non-proliferation efforts and build confidence among states. Kyrgyzstan serves as a depositary of the treaty establishing this zone, and we see this role as a responsibility to support dialogue, transparency, and cooperation in the regional and beyond. I would like to inform that on April this year will start the 11th review conference of the NPT with Vietnam in the chair. The conference convenes at a difficult moment for the non-proliferation regime. The preparatory cycle concluded without substantive recommendations. Delegations will work through the three traditional clusters: disarmament, non-proliferation, and peaceful uses of nuclear energy, alongside persistent challenges related to the JCPOA and DPRK nuclear program and implementation of the 1995 Middle East Resolution. Whether or not the conference adopts a consensus final document will be a key test of the health of the global nuclear order and warrants close follow-up. Another area where we place strong emphasis is education. Kyrgyzstan initiated the International Day for Disarmament and Non-Proliferation Awareness because we believe that lasting change in security policy starts with knowledge and understanding. Commemorative days like this are not only symbolic, they help raise awareness, engage young people, encourage public discussion, and keep the humanitarian perspective at the center of the global debates. Those days, events dedicated to the International Day are taking place not only in New York, in the capital of Kyrgyzstan. The Ministry of Foreign Affairs also organizes thematic meetings and lectures with the participation of students, experts, and representatives of international structures, which underline the systematic nature of our work to promote knowledge in this area. Kyrgyzstan consistently supports international legal efforts aimed at reducing nuclear risks and advancing disarmaments. On September 2025, our country has signed the Treaty on the Non-Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, reaffirming our commitment to the humanitarian approach and the strengthening global norms that moves us toward a world without nuclear weapons. We see this treaty as a part of a broader international framework that complements existing non-proliferation mechanisms and reinforces the global security architecture. In November-December 2026, the first review conference of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons will mark the first comprehensive stock-taking of the treaty's implementation since its entry into force in 2021. States parties will assess progress made, discuss universalization efforts and verification measures, and set out the road ahead for advancing the treaty's objectives at the international level. The conference carries significant political weight as a concrete expression of the humanitarian approach to nuclear disarmament. Its outcomes and any expansion of the treaty's membership deserve careful attention as part of the broader disarmament landscape. More and more, it's clear that nuclear weapons are not only a strategic or military issue, they are a humanitarian issue. Any use of nuclear weapons would have catastrophic consequences for human health and environment, economics, and future generations. This is why the voice of the medical and scientific community is so powerful and so necessary. Initiatives like this global classroom helps bring the conversation back to what matters most: people, lives, and our shared future. Educational programs play a strategic role. They build critical thinking, encourage responsibility, and create international network of trust and cooperation. They also remind us that global security is not shaped only by governments. It is shaped by informed and engaged societies. I would especially like to highlight the importance of young professionals. Your participation is not just about learning. It is about becoming part of the global community working toward a safer world. We live in a time of multiple interconnected challenges: geopolitical tensions, climate change, rapid technological developments. Reducing nuclear risks is an essential part of addressing those broader challenges and ensuring sustainable development and long-term stability. Regional initiatives, international treaties, and educational efforts must work together. None of them is sufficient alone, but together they create momentum for real change. Dear participants, our engagement in this program gives reason for optimism. It shows that a new generation is ready to approach security not only through power, but through cooperation, knowledge, and human value. The future of international dialogue will depend on people like you, on your ideas, your professionalism, and your willingness to work across border and disciplines. Let me conclude with 3 brief thoughts. First, education disarmament is an investment in long-term global security. Second, regional efforts like a Central Asian nuclear weapon-free zone demonstrate that practical steps toward a world without nuclear weapons are possible today. And third, only through dialogue, cooperation, and the active involvement of young people can we reduce nuclear risks and build lasting trust. Thank you again for the organizers for these important initiatives. I wish all participants an inspiring and productive journey throughout the program. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Representative Mulkubatov. I really, really appreciate you again taking the time to join us today in what I imagine is an incredibly busy and overwhelming start to the week. I also want to thank you for Kyrgyzstan's recent signatory of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, and we are very excited to see that instrument of ratification deposited sometime in the near future. I know many of us on this call will be at the review conference to the ban treaty later this year in New York City, and look forward to seeing you there, if not at the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty Review Conference in just a month. So thank you again, and I want to thank you for giving us the reason for optimism that is the nuclear ban, and that is in disarmament education. Like you said, education is an investment in long-term security, and I think we need to see the long-term vision of what we're doing right now, as acutely things are both terrifying and a path forward does not always seem very clear. So thank you endlessly for joining us today. I know you have a busy day, so we will say goodbye for now. Feel free to stay on for as long as you can. But thank you, and we'll be in touch. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. Thank you very
Thank
much.
you. Okay, we are going to move right along to a presentation by Mackenzie Knight Boyle. As you all saw in your email and through the intro remarks today, Mackenzie is going to guide us through sort of a nuclear weapons 101 presentation. She's going to tell us about the current nuclear arms states, their stockpiles, what delivery systems are, what type of weapons exist, and what we all need to know to advance this work. IPPNW's work and the work of many of our partners is based on the humanitarian impacts of these weapons, what these weapons do. But in order to learn that information, which we will in just a month, we need to learn more about the weapons themselves. So I'm going to pass this right along to Mackenzie, who again is the Senior Research Associate for the Nuclear Information Project at the Federation of American Scientists, where she co-authors the Nuclear Notebook, which is an authoritative open source estimate of global nuclear forces and trends, and conducts analysis of nuclear weapons programs and policies. She's based in Washington, D.C. in the United States, and is an incredible researcher who we're lucky to have today. So please have your pencils out, have your Google Doc open to take your notes. Mackenzie will give about a 30-minute presentation, I think, and then we'll have time for Q&A. So write down your questions now, and Mackenzie, I'll pass the floor to you.
Great. Thank you so much, Molly. It's really great to be here. I'm going to go through a lot of information. There's going to be a lot of numbers and details, but I kind of want to start out by saying that the goal of my presentation is not to overwhelm, and it's not to leave you with any sense of pessimism, but I think it's just really important for all of us to understand the state of what we're up against when it comes to the nuclear enterprise across the globe today. So that is my goal here today, is to share with you, I think, the information that it's important for all of us to know. Also, just because nuclear weapons thrive in secrecy. And I think the more that we know about them, the more that people understand about them, the less they're able to do that. So that's the takeaway I hope that you take from my presentation today. Okay, so as Molly said, I'm Mackenzie Knight Boyle. I work at the Federation of American Scientists. And basically what that means is that my primary work and the work that my team and I do is we track global nuclear arsenals. We use open sources, satellite imagery, we submit Freedom of Information Act requests to the government, and we use all of that to develop authoritative estimates about, most simply, who has what and how many, and what does it mean. So that's what I'm here to tell you. But first I want to talk a little bit about what are nuclear weapons. And this is going to be kind of brief, but it's important to understand that nuclear weapons are different than other types of conventional bombs that we have. So a nuclear weapon, most simply, is just a device that uses nuclear chain reactions to create a massive amount of explosive yield. This is a little bit of an example. This is from Princeton, researchers at Princeton University. They put together this graphic. Apologies for the glare. I literally took this photo while I was at their gallery in Princeton, so that's why there's a glare on it. But this is just to show you visually the difference between conventional weapons and today's nuclear weapons, and also importantly, the difference between today's nuclear weapons and the first nuclear weapons that existed in the world in 1945. So teeny tiny little dot in the bottom left shows you 1 ton of TNT. The weapon directly to the right of that, the Moab, otherwise known as the mother of all bombs, that's a conventional weapon, 10 tons of TNT. To the right of that is the explosive yield of the bomb that was dropped on Hiroshima by the United States. And finally, on the far right, we have one Ohio-class ballistic missile submarine, which is a United States ballistic missile submarine that carries submarine-launched ballistic missiles. And this is the explosive yield of nuclear weapons that one of those submarines can carry. So that's just to kind of paint a picture for you of what modern nuclear weapons we have today. There we go. And then there's a couple of different types of nuclear weapons that exist. I'm going to briefly go through them just to kind of show you a little bit more about how nuclear weapons have evolved since 1945. So first we have fission nuclear weapons. This first one is the type of nuclear weapon that was dropped on Hiroshima, a gun type. And this next one is an implosion type nuclear weapon with a plutonium core, and that was the type of weapon that was dropped on Nagasaki. The most simple fission weapons that exist today use this implosion design with plutonium core, as it's a little bit more, it's a weird word to use, but like sophisticated design. It's more efficient. And then really these are the kind of worst of the worst of nuclear weapons that exist. These are also known as hydrogen bombs. So thermonuclear bombs are hydrogen bombs. They basically use a fission reaction to trigger a fusion reaction. So they have both type of nuclear reaction, which releases an insane amount of energy. If you watched Oppenheimer, you might remember this man. Benny Safdie was the actor who played Edward Teller. The actual Edward Teller is on the right. And in the movie, if you saw it, you may remember that he was constantly talking about how he wanted to make, how he was theorizing how to create an even bigger, even more destructive bomb. And that was the thermonuclear weapon. And Edward Teller is known today as the father of the hydrogen bomb. The United States, the United Kingdom, Russia, France, and China and India have all demonstrated achievement of thermonuclear capability. So the majority of nuclear weapons countries that exist today have thermonuclear weapons. The largest of which that currently exists is a thermonuclear bomb in the United States arsenal called the B-83. It has a maximum yield of 1.2 megatons. And for context, that is one bomb that's equal to approximately 75 Hiroshimas. So that is a little bit of context about today's nuclear weapons. But again, the takeaway is not all of the small details in the science. I don't need you to remember these diagrams. The takeaway is that nuclear weapons have gotten more efficient, more sophisticated, and more powerful since 1945. Okay, so now we're going to talk about delivery vehicles because it can get kind of confusing when you're talking about nuclear weapons. When people talk about all the different types that we have, the difference between warheads and the actual systems that deliver those warheads, which is why they're called delivery vehicles. It's very, very euphemistic language that we like to use when it comes to nuclear weapons. There's many types of different systems that are used to deliver nuclear weapons to their targets. And they can be put into three main buckets that make up what we call the nuclear triad of land, air, and sea. Your land-based delivery systems are things like missiles launched from silos in the ground. So like intercontinental ballistic missiles. And also several countries have road mobile missiles. That's the bottom left image there. That are basically, they have these giant trucks that can drive ballistic missiles around and launch them from wherever. The air delivery systems are things like gravity bombs dropped from planes. Those planes are referred to as bombers. And that's like the nuclear weapons that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So the belly of the plane opens and a bomb drops out. But there's also today air-launched cruise missiles, or Russia even has an air-launched ballistic missile. So these are missiles that are attached to the plane and they can launch it from the plane. And then finally, our sea delivery systems are missiles that can be launched either from submarines or, for some countries, from surface ships, like aircraft carriers or other types of battleships. So another way of categorizing nuclear weapons is into two categories of strategic versus non-strategic, or sometimes called tactical. There actually isn't one precise agreed upon definition for what makes a nuclear weapon one or the other. But some helpful ways to think about it are that strategic weapons are really the big bads. These are typically longer range, more powerful yield. They're going to be your intercontinental ballistic missiles, submarine launched ballistic missiles that are launched from ballistic missile submarines, and your heavy bombers, which are basically just very large bomber planes that can travel intercontinental distances. And then tactical nuclear weapons, they're often interchangeably referred to as theater or battlefield nuclear weapons, but the most accurate phrase to use is non-strategic or tactical. They're much harder to define, but generally we're going to consider those weapons that have a shorter range, a lower yield, but we're going to come back to that. Because these are things like cruise missiles, torpedoes, landmines, fighter jets that are smaller planes that can't travel as far, so we refer to those as tactical nuclear weapon systems. It's important to note here that some tactical or battlefield nuclear weapons that exist in arsenals today have a higher yield than the bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So the reason I'm explaining these phrases to you is not so that you can go pass a test on what's a strategic weapon versus a tactical nuclear weapon, but so you can have an informed understanding when you're participating in conversations or debates about nuclear weapons, to be able to argue that tactical nuclear weapons are not any less bad than strategic nuclear weapons. Um, these are weapons that, in many cases, are just as, if not more powerful than the bombs that were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, which were devastating, to put it mildly. And so we can't let countries use these terms to downplay the devastating effects of these weapons that exist today or act like they're any safer than the rest of nuclear weapons. So, because of the distinction between strategic and non-strategic nuclear weapons, you might sometimes see people refer to the strategic triad. And the strategic triad is made up of intercontinental ballistic missiles, heavy bombers, and submarine-launched ballistic missiles. Um, and the strategic triad is just a bit more specific than the nuclear triad of land, air, and sea. And so that's the triad that I'm going to kind of focus on as I transition to telling you who has what. Um, Mostly just because it would take so long to go through if I talked about everything that everybody has. So I would have to keep it to the big bads. But don't forget what I said about how tactical nuclear weapons are not, they're not to be ignored. So first, we're going to look at the big picture. There are 9 countries with nuclear weapons today: Russia, the United States, China, France, the United Kingdom, India, Pakistan, Israel, and North Korea. Combined, these countries have more than 12,000 nuclear weapons. But the US and Russia alone possess approximately 90% of that total. At the Federation of American Scientists, we estimate that 6 out of the 9 nuclear weapon states are increasing their nuclear weapon stockpiles. And actually, as of today, which I'm going to get to because of a speech by President Macron of France, that is now going to change to 7. 7 countries are increasing their nuclear weapon stockpiles, and every single one of them is modernizing or upgrading their nuclear forces. And what we mean when we say modernizing is they are making their nuclear weapons be able to travel farther. They're making them more powerful. They're making them more sophisticated, maybe developing missiles that are more maneuverable so they can get around defenses. Um, They are upgrading Cold War era systems to more modern system, things like that. So they are bringing their nuclear weapons to the modern age, and they're making them more powerful, more destructive, more deadly, faster, able to travel farther, you name it. But let's talk a little bit about specifically who has what, which countries are the ones with full strategic triads. So you can see from this rudimentary chart that I put together that we have three countries whose nuclear arsenals constitute a full strategic triad, and that's the United States, Russia, and China. I made China slightly transparent compared to the US and Russia. That's just because their heavy bomber leg of their triad, the air leg of their triad, is a little bit uncertain because they had retired the nuclear mission from their heavy bombers back a while ago. But in 2018, the US Department of Defense reported that China's Air Force had been reassigned a nuclear mission. So we're including it. And again, here I'm showing you the big bads, who has what strategic systems. If we're talking about which countries, just in general, have a nuclear triad of land, air, and sea delivery systems, India and Israel also would join that club. Um, you can see here quickly, France maintains a dyad. It's the only country that does so. They have strategic bombers and they have submarine-launched ballistic missiles. The United Kingdom, all they have is submarine-launched ballistic missiles. Not all they have in terms of it's not that many. It's still a very deadly arsenal, but it's the only type of system that they maintain. So, in addition to the 9 countries that have their own nuclear weapons programs, there are several countries that host nuclear weapons on their soil as part of what we call nuclear sharing arrangements, which I'm realizing now is another very euphemistic term that we use for nuclear weapons. Many of these are NATO countries. There are approximately 100 US nuclear weapons deployed and stored at bases in Belgium, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, Turkey, and potentially the United Kingdom. It's been a very recent discovery of my team that the US was revamping a Air Force base in the United Kingdom to potentially store nuclear weapons there again that had been retired from that base decades ago. And so we believe that the US has actually begun storing nuclear weapons in the United Kingdom again in the past couple of years. Now, these countries store these nuclear weapons as part of NATO's nuclear mission. They contribute what's called dual capable aircraft. And these are just aircraft that can deliver both nuclear and conventional weapons to NATO's nuclear mission. So basically, these countries have their own aircraft that would be used to deliver US nuclear weapons in a conflict. Greece also maintains a reserve unit of these aircraft for use in a contingency mission, but doesn't actively store US nuclear weapons in their country anymore. The other nuclear host state is Belarus, which is a more recent development. In March of 2023, Putin formally announced that Russia would deploy tactical nuclear weapons in Belarus. And in June of that year, he stated that the first warheads had been delivered to Belarus. Belarus has a supply of Russian supplied short range ballistic missiles. And various statements and satellite imagery that we've looked at indicates that Russia is deploying and storing nuclear weapons in Belarus for use on that system. So this is just a map from one of our recent nuclear notebooks that shows you all of the nuclear weapons sites in Europe. But you can see there specifically the green locations are ones that are there for the NATO nuclear mission. And there's one orange one, the Russian site called Osipovichi Depot, right there in the middle. That is where Russia stores nuclear weapons in Belarus. So I hope that gives you a sense of kind of the static situation of which countries have which nuclear weapons and how many. But I want to get into some more, we'll get into some more specific nuclear weapon systems in a bit. But I want to talk to you a little bit about what we're worried about going forward, and the things that we're keeping a close eye on. So during the Cold War, there were only two major nuclear superpowers, Today, there are 9 countries with nuclear weapons, and these countries have various interlocking deterrence dynamics with each other. So changes to one country's posture prompt changes to another country's posture, which then prompt changes to another country's posture, and so on and so forth. And while the United States and Russia still maintain by far the largest arsenals, China is rapidly expanding its arsenal and causing many to worry that we're headed toward a world with 3 nuclear peers. Um, these dynamics are particularly concerning given the second point, which is that the last remaining arms control treaty between the US and Russia, New START, the New Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty, expired on February 5th of this year, so a few weeks ago, with no new treaty in place to take its place. So we're now in an era of no arms control, no limits on these countries' nuclear arsenals for the first time in half a century. We are also seeing an increased role for nuclear weapons in countries' national security strategies. We are seeing, sorry, it's not clicking for some reason. There we go. We're seeing new technologies and advancements in AI, cyber, missile defense, hypersonic glide vehicles, and more, which are making deterrence dynamics more complex and more uncertain. And then, like I said before, every single nuclear weapon state is engaging in efforts to modernize and or expand their nuclear arsenals. And back to the point on tactical nuclear weapons. In addition to nuclear weapons taking on a larger role in countries' military doctrines, with that, we're seeing an increased emphasis on tactical, non-strategic nuclear weapon systems. I, of course, have been focusing a lot on kind of the big bads of nuclear weapons, but tactical nuclear weapons pose their own unique concern. Um, First of all, we're seeing a lot of countries pursuing development of more tactical nuclear systems. In the United States, for example, there has been a political power struggle over the development of a new nuclear weapon, the Sea-Launched Cruise Missile, also often called SLCM-N, Nuclear Sea-Launched Cruise Missile. And Congress has actually forced its development, despite the fact that it's a system that the Navy does not want. Um, and that's just one example, but other countries as well are increasing their arsenals of tactical nuclear weapons, developing new ones. And this is really concerning because it suggests a stronger intention to actually use nuclear weapons in a war-fighting capacity, rather than as a means of deterrence. Tactical nuclear weapons lower the threshold for nuclear use, making it more likely that a leader could decide to use one if it's painted in this way as just a small battlefield weapon. So, on modernization and expansion, if you look purely at a chart like this, at how the total number of nuclear weapons in the world is changing from year to year, you would probably come away from that thinking that the disarmament picture is better than it actually is. Because each year, the overall number of nuclear warheads in the world declines on a relatively steady basis. However, that is mostly because of the United States and Russia dismantling a couple hundred retired warheads from their Cold War era stockpiles each year. So that is kind of painting this image that global nuclear arsenals are consistently going down. But we're seeing that many nuclear weapon states are increasing the number of warheads in their military stockpiles. And nearly all of those countries are reducing their transparency surrounding their nuclear arsenals. To highlight a few in particular, China, like I mentioned, is undergoing one of the largest and quickest expansions of its nuclear arsenal that we have ever seen since Cold War era. The United Kingdom recently announced that it will end decades of transparency, or decades of reductions, and start increasing its arsenal once again. The United States is spending over $1.7 trillion over the next 30 years to modernize each leg of its nuclear triad. And just today, I had to update my presentation because of it. President Macron of France made a speech at Elong, France's naval base for its ballistic missile submarines, where he said the following. We must strengthen our nuclear deterrence in the face of the combination of threats, and we must think about our deterrent strategy in the depth of the European continent, in full respect of our sovereignty, with the progressive implementation of what I would call advanced deterrence. He also detailed a lot of the specific weapon systems and plans that France is rolling out to bolster its nuclear arsenal. Said that an upgrade of our nuclear arsenal is essential, and ordered an increase in the number of nuclear warheads in France's arsenal. And followed that up by saying, to put an end to all speculation, we will no longer disclose the figures for our nuclear arsenal. To be free, one must be feared, and to be feared, one must be powerful. This increase in our arsenal is a testament to that. So I wanted to go through this because it is the most current news, in that it happened literally today, but because I think it's incredibly important to show you the ongoing investments and developments in nuclear weapon systems that we are seeing every day, currently. These are not historical arsenals. These are arsenals that we are tracking on a daily basis because of developments like this. So quickly, because I think it's also important to note, there's certain technologies and capabilities that a lot of countries are pursuing, that we are tracking, and that are kind of at like the forefront of nuclear weapons threats. And so I mentioned a little bit of this earlier, but countries are consistently pursuing systems with longer ranges. That doesn't really apply to the US, Russia, and China, who just already have a triad of strategic systems of long range, but the rest of them. What we call MIRV capability, you don't need to know what that acronym stands for, but if you're curious, it stands for Multiple Independently Targetable Re-Entry Vehicles. And what it means is countries are developing missiles that can carry more than one nuclear warhead that can then be sent to different targets. So one missile can deliver several nuclear warheads. And in addition, countries are pursuing systems with increased maneuverability and survivability, weapons of higher yields, new delivery systems in general, weapons of improved accuracy, and then we're seeing countries set up more nuclear bases across their country, essentially just deploying nuclear weapons to more locations. So that's kind of a rough point to end on, but unfortunately that is where I end. But I look forward to any questions. And again, I don't want the takeaway from this to be like, oh no, we're screwed. I want the takeaway to be, if more people talk about nuclear weapons and know about these developments, then I think we can put some pressure, some political and public pressure on countries, to stop investing so much money, and into these arsenals, and to choose diplomacy instead.
Thanks so much, Mackenzie, for that wonderful, and to be frank, terrifying presentation about what we're up against here. I think that um, you know, started off this conversation, and I quote, nuclear weapons thrive in secrecy, which is really the undercurrent of why we're hosting this IPPNW global classroom. We need this information to demystify nuclear weapons, to sift through the news, to make sense of what's happening, and to have the knowledge and tools to push back against everything that the nine nuclear weapon states are doing.
Yeah, I would just say, first of all, thank you for being here. I think it is a huge first step, to show up to a space to even just like learn more about nuclear weapons and how they operate in our world. I hope that you stay engaged, beyond this. I hope that you take what you learn, forward. I think sometimes it can be really daunting, and you can be left thinking, how can I confront the nuclear establishment? But I think the biggest takeaway that I hope you have is that people have a lot of, political power when it comes to nuclear weapons. Nuclear weapons are not an immutable force. They are not a given. They are in most cases, a product of politics. And that is where we yield a lot of power. And so advocate in your countries specifically. Like I said, nuclear weapons do not just exist in the nine countries that have them. If you live in one of those 9 countries, I hope you continue to challenge the nuclear program in your country. But also, if you live in one of the other numerous countries I mentioned that supports and upholds the nuclear weapons of other countries, you can challenge that in your home country as well. And I think that's a really strong place to start. So just know that we hold a lot of power, and there's a lot of ways that we can challenge the continued existence and reliance on nuclear weapons.
Thank you, Mackenzie. I think that we're speaking the same language here. I have just literally 90 seconds of closing remarks here before we close out for the day. But again, thank you so much, Mackenzie, for joining us and for sharing your insight and your optimism that we can push against this issue and that we have the control. You know, the path forward is people power based on diplomacy, based on shared respect, and yeah, based on multilateral diplomacy going forward. Something that honestly might feel very far-fetched in this moment, but we don't have the option of not pushing that forward. Something is going to break. There will either be a new nuclear weapon state, there will either be the use of nuclear weapons, or we'll see the abolition of nuclear weapons. And I'm unwilling to accept any reality other than the abolition of nuclear weapons. And that starts here with education and with collective action. So, to that end, I have one ask for each of you. So you're here, you obviously care about this issue. Maybe this is the first time you've ever cared about this issue. Maybe you've been doing it for decades. Look around, see who's here, and more importantly, see who's missing. We are going to keep registration open for just one more week. Like I said, in these moments of crises, people want to take action. People want to find community. Find somebody who's feeling scared. Find somebody who wants to join an international community pushing back against this deadly reality. If each of you could get 3 friends, colleagues, or coworkers to join us throughout the next year, that would be incredible. Again, this work requires all of us. So please send out the link to everybody. It's ippnw.org/global-classroom. Registration's open to anyone. So please, please, please do so. I'd be really excited to see an even bigger group than we have today. And today we see a bigger group than we saw 10 days ago. So thank you again. For our next step here, every month moving forward, we're going to build on the knowledge gained. So our next session is going to be on that's Thursday, April 2nd at midnight, which is 8 p.m. here in Boston. I will send around a link so you all can sort out that time for your time zone. Again, all of the sessions will be at different times to accommodate our various time zones that we have here. I know quite a few people are here across the world from me, which means it's the middle of the night. So thank you so much. I hope that this next session is better for you. So again, that's Thursday, April 2nd at midnight. During that session, we'll learn about the humanitarian impacts of nuclear weapons. So Mackenzie led us today through the 9 nuclear weapon states, the number of weapons that they have. And next month, we're going to learn about what these weapons do. You know, we can talk about deterrence theory all we want, but deterrence theory relies on the use of the weapons. That session will be led by Dr. Joe Hodgkin, who's a physician here in Boston, Massachusetts, and the co-chair of Greater Boston Physicians for Social Responsibility. Thank you all. My thanks again to Representative Mulkubatov, who is the Deputy Permanent Representative of the Kyrgyz Republic to the United Nations. Thank you again to Mackenzie Knight-Boyle of FAS. Thank you to Andwin DeVos for doing tech support. And thank you to Soka Gakkai International for making this global classroom possible with their generous support. And thank you to each of you for being a part of this movement through the global classroom. Share it with 3 friends. Take care of yourselves